Welcome, everybody, to the Cone of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, Dr. DrAndyRoark. Guys, I got a great one here with my good friend, Eric Garcia. This is a sprawling, big idea, looking at the future of medicine episode. If you like episodes that make you think about what is going to happen in our profession in the next 5 to 10 years, there's not a much better one in the can than this one. I really love it. We start out with this idea Eric puts forward right at the beginning, as he's heard again and again and again that practices are too busy and they need to hire. But when you look at the key performance indicators for these practices, their profitability is going down and down. Maybe we don't need to hire. Maybe it's time to really start thinking about efficiency in our practices. And then so we dive into that. We start talking about artificial intelligence and how do you leverage this. We talk about the rise of independent practices as we're starting to see independent practices owners coming back. We start talking about, is there really a shortage of veterinarians in the next 20 or 30 years? And so anyway, a lot of interest in what is the future going to look like? Let's get into it.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. DrAndyRoark.
Welcome to the podcast, Eric Garcia. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing well, brother. How are you?
I'm so great. It is so good to see you. For those who don't know you, stop living under a rock. Take your head out and you gotta pay attention. Eric Garcia is one of the nicest guys in veterinary medicine. He's a dear friend of mine. He is an IT and digital strategist. He is a digital marketer, an industry thought leader, one of the most engaging practice management speakers that you'll find in our industry. Just a genuine, all-around wonderful person. He's one of those people I like to kick around ideas with. We were just talking before we started recording about Eric writes a lot about unplugging, which is setting aside designated time to get off of your devices. And he and I have had debates about the idea of unplugging and how best to unplug and things. For years now, it's been at least 5 years, we have been discussing and debating, and we have very different ideas about what getting off of your cell phone and devices should look like and can look like. And we discuss them with passion and enthusiasm every time we get together. And so we were doing that before we came on here. But that's not what we're talking about today. Eric, I was reaching out to you recently, and I'm always curious in what you're curious about, and what are you thinking about, and what are you working on? And you brought up the idea that we have a lot of people in our industry who talk about needing to hire. They say, I'm shorthanded, I need to hire. And your question is often, do you really need to hire somebody? Or are we in a place where we're not working efficiently? And maybe hiring is not really what we need to do, but we've been told that that's what we need to do. And so I really love this idea when you laid it out, because one of the fundamental questions I have in life is, when do you know that you're just not organized enough, or we're not communicating well enough, things like that? And I say that as a guy who has always looked at his days and wondered, should I have done more today? Should I have squeezed more into this day? If I was better organized, could I get more things done? And sometimes the answer is absolutely not. You are working at or beyond normal human capacity, and you should be kinder to yourself, and you should relax, Andy. And sometimes the answer is yes, you should have gotten your stuff together. And if you had been organized and had a plan, you could have easily gotten a lot more done today and freed yourself up to do other things. And so I don't know. So I just kind of word vomited all of that kind of out. Let me just sort of put it over to you, Eric, and sort of say, talk to me a little bit about the idea that we're really busy and we need to hire versus we're really busy and we need to get more efficient.
It's interesting, just to piggyback off of your last point, being more efficient and having more time doesn't always mean that you need to do more because you have time regained, right? Sometimes it's just doing less or actually, living a more structured day. But yeah, I think right now what we're seeing are so many practices that are really struggling to hire people, and everyone feels like they need to hire. And when you talk to a lot of practices, you hear a lot of, oh my gosh, we're just short staffed. We're really busy. There are days of chaos, and We don't need to focus on marketing, or we don't really need to focus on growth per se. We really need to make sure that we have enough team members. And the interesting point about that is when you hear that from a majority of practices, and certainly not all, but a majority of practices, and you look at their key performance indicators. So we're looking at things like, what are overall patient visits looking like? What are new client numbers looking like? What is compliance and retention looking like? And what does revenue look like? And if those areas are not up and we're not seeing enough growth, then you're often really struggling from an inefficiency challenge in your practice. And what's interesting in the practices that we work with, or even those that I talk to that have numbers and workshops and things like that, it's more often than not, practices are not growing enough to support the need for an additional person. It's just that they're operating inefficiently. And my concern about this is that if a lot of practices are really looking to hire and they're not actually understanding their key performance indicators and where things are headed as a profession, that we're going to hire all of these people, but we're not going to have the business to support the long-term play there in paying out those salaries, which is wildly alarming.
Do you think that a lot of businesses have, I'm sort of thinking of independent practices here, but it doesn't have to be them. But do you think that there's a philosophy that it's always been, if I get busy enough, I just hire someone else because my busyness indicates that I can support them? You know what I mean? Of just like, if I have enough work to hire another person, I will just, because of how things work out, I will have enough, the money will take care of itself to support them. Is that sort of the mentality you think?
I think so. And to an extent, there's not enough money necessarily to support them. Who takes that hit is the practice owner when it comes to their profitability. And when you actually talk to people, our mutual colleague, David McCormick, and you talk about what practice appraisals are looking like, and you're asking those very pointed questions. What are you seeing in terms of profitability? What differences are you seeing? And David will tell you himself, one of the biggest challenges he's seeing is practices are not nearly as profitable as they once were. And a lot of that is for what we just talked about. We don't have enough business coming in to support these additional salaries that we're having to pay for the people that we're acquiring, which is troublesome. But yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I challenge practices to have that. There was a great case study that was published in Harvard Business Review on a book called Digital Transformation Best Practices. And they looked at two companies. They looked at Amazon and Walmart. So Amazon is considered to be a tech-first company, but tech-first not in the way that you and I can order from an app and it comes in. Not that kind of tech, not consumer-facing tech, but operational efficiency technology. So what Amazon does when they're experiencing high levels of growth, or when they're anticipating growth, what they look at is they look at the operational efficiency of their warehouses and their distribution centers and the technology that they use for that, right? So, hey, we're going to expect, Cyber Mondays coming up. Let's make sure that our technology and algorithm is optimized to make sure that we get these orders out on time, and that and we're doing it with the teams that we currently have. Where Walmart is not looked at to be a tech-first company. Walmart's considered to be a people-first company, although I joke, people-first not necessarily in the service that they offer, but people first in their outlook on what they do when they're seeing growth. When Walmart is seeing growth, they say, well, we need more people in our stores to sustain this growth. Where what they don't do is they don't step back and they say, well, what can we do? How can we do better with what we currently have? And so as a result of that, Amazon actually has a 67% better performance rate based off of their revenue and their volume of team in comparison to Walmart, which makes more, but costs them a lot more because of the volume of employees they have. Interestingly enough, though, I was at the Consumer Electronic Trade Show this January, and that is the one thing that Walmart is now focusing on. And they had a whole booth just on what they're doing to improve efficiency, because they now recognize the opportunity to be more efficient in their stores. And so I challenge practices to think like Amazon. It's to say, oh, we're super busy, but how can we maximize the efficiency in our practice first? And then if we're growing and we still see this and we're still remaining busy, then we consider hiring, rather than to be Walmart and saying, oh, we're really busy, we need more people, because again, the numbers don't always support that.
Have you seen sort of this idea from, I think it's often staff driven, but the easy button when we're feeling stressed is we need more people. We're like, oh, we're so big, we need to hire more. And I think, and again, I want to be generous here too, but I do think that the great thing about when you're busy and you say, we need to hire more, is that nobody has to make any changes. At least that's not how it feels. It's not like we need to make some hard changes and get a new operating system or get a new, workflow in place. It's like all that requires change, and people don't like change. It's much better to keep doing exactly what we're doing with more people. Yeah. And so I don't have to change, and I feel like our capacity goes up, and that's the answer. That's kind of how I look at it. It's sort of the easy button in that way. So on sort of a scale of 1 to 10, how big a challenge do you think it is for most practices to really drill in and get more efficient?
Oh, I mean, it's highly huge opportunity for practices. In fact, I believe it was IDEX has a study. It's called the Practice Productivity Index, and there's a self-assessment in that index that practices can go through to determine what opportunities there are for improving efficiency. And what was really interesting is, so practices can, kind of go to somewhere like that and complete the self-assessment to see. But it doesn't often even take a full-on assessment. It's just taking a step back and looking at all of the things that you do on a daily basis that really weigh down on the team, and then say, is there an opportunity for us to do that better? I'll give you a few examples. One is real-time scheduling, right? Think about how hard it is to hire CSRs and to get them onboarded and to be able to check people out, create estimates, take the phone calls that are coming in, manage the online communication, all of the things that they're burdened with. I always used to say, back in the day when I worked in a practice and I'd have to fill in, that's a chaotic job. But taking the burden of having real-time, giving them the opportunity to have real-time booking online dramatically reduces the volume of appointments that they're needing to communicate, whether it's through an online portal or over the phone, and allows them to do their job more efficient, or at least spend more time with the people that are in front of them in the practice. Little things like that. There's a practice recently, and I'm going to butcher the number, but it was over 50% in terms of the number of people that are booking appointments online. Andy, think about how many less phone calls that are coming in as a result of that. But the thing that I also say with that is, there are practices who are like, oh, the idea of giving my clients control to, book appointments sounds awful. And there's a lot of fail-safe mechanisms built into it. If someone puts that their dog's been having diarrhea for a certain number of days, it won't let them book an appointment. There are a lot of fail-safes. And so I just challenge practices, whoever sends out your reminders, see if they have online booking. In most cases, they do, and it doesn't cost you anything, and you can work with them. Having artificial intelligence produce medical notes is another huge opportunity for veterinarians. But now it's not even just that, right? It's also using the right tool to be able to maximize efficiency. All it really does is you download an app on your phone or any mic-enabled device, and it will record the entire appointment, and it'll start the soap note for you, and it'll clean it up. It'll remove any kind of personal conversations. If you're talking to an owner and you happen to know their kids and they go to school with your kids and you're talking about that, it eliminates all of that from the medical note. And what we're actually hearing is that a lot of practices are getting even more accurate medical notes because AI is listening to the whole appointment. And a lot of times you're producing the note at the end of the day if it's the same day. But it's not even just doing that anymore. It's also doing that in an efficient way. So there are a lot of AI tools that now will start the medical note for you in your PIMS. So making sure that you even use the most effective and efficient version of that tool. Fun little story real quick is I started recommending this to practices at a group that I speak to every year. And so I introduced it to them at some point last year. And, they were a little skeptical about it. Some were really excited. And so I always tell people, you should always try something at least once or twice. And if it doesn't work, then I don't ever say never. Just say it didn't work right now, but let's try it again in the future. And so this practice owner did. She tried it. And her husband, who I have no idea who he is, sent me a message to thank me for recommending artificial intelligence for medical record keeping to his wife, who is now leaving work early. And that kind of goes back to the start of our conversation is, maybe it's just as simple as leaving work early or having your lunch. It's not necessarily that you need to do more. She didn't stay 2 hours later to do other things.
No, I get it. This is my own weird neuroses of I'm like, I should do more productive things. And like normal people are like, I would just like to go home and see my family. And I'm like, I guess you could do that.
Yeah.
I mean, or you could write an article about something that people don't really care about and just put it.
You and I should work on that.
That's going to take some work. Yeah. Save this summer on the DrAndyRoark On-Demand Team Training Bundle. Guys, use coupon code SUMMERBUNDLE for 12 months of access to both the Charming the Angry Client and Exam Room Communication Toolkit courses for only $4.99. That's over $250 in savings. Guys, these courses are for the entire team to take, and they include Train the Trainer modules to help you deliver them for maximum impact. Guys, this offer is only valid through August 31st. Check out DrAndyRoark.com/team training. I'll put a link down in the show notes. Remember, the checkout code is SUMMERBUNDLE, all one word. Let's get back into this episode. Here's a little bit my concern. Let me ask you how you feel this. And so, okay, so I think the writing's on the wall for where we're going with artificial intelligence. I think that artificial intelligence is going to do a lot of things, but I think one of the big things it's going to do is remove the low-level tedious work. A lot of low-level like a lot of just writing things up, like records and stuff like that. It's not about practicing medicine. It's about taking these sort of mundane things and taking them off of our plate. And so I think that's a beautiful thing. My concern a little bit is if you push doctors right now, I don't know if the tech is fully ready for what we want it to do. And I'm curious what you think about that. And it's sort of like, if you push people too early to try something and it's not ready and it breaks down on them, is it that much harder to get them into it later on? So do you think it's worth fighting the battle now to try to sort of try out AI stuff in your practice? Again, I've heard similar stories to what you're talking about as far as a recording device, your cell phone in the exam room, talking about the pet owner's kids and family and all that stuff gets cut out and captured. But also, I look at Zoom AI recordings of meetings that I have been in, and they are Looney Tunes sometimes, and it is quite funny what AI thinks is happening in the meeting. And so I'm like, I don't know. Do I fight this battle now, or do I wait till 2026 and then fight it there? And I think it goes a lot easier. How do you kind of get your head around that, Eric? Are you like pedal down, go for it now? Or are you like, I could see waiting a little bit?
Yeah, so 100% pedal down and do it now. And I'm actually really glad that you brought up that point, because sometimes the problem is especially when we're talking about technology, is that because there are so many options, not everyone is as good. Not every tool is as good as the other. And so, just because someone says they do AI for medical record keeping doesn't mean that they're at the point in their business to have validated that because they perfected the nuances of, the veterinary appointment. And so, I always tell practices, you have to kind of do your due diligence into the right tools that are out there, talk to your colleagues, see which ones everyone seems to be using, because they're the ones who've already had, and I say maybe a year, 2 years of feedback from, hundreds and thousands of veterinary appointments. The problem with AI for medical record keeping is, Andy, I kid you not, there are probably a minimum of 20, 25 companies right now doing it. And some are way further along than others. Is it perfect? No. But is it saving you the amount of time from having to do this thing yourself every single time? Absolutely. And that's where practices are, most practices will be quick to tell you it's not perfect, but it's perfect the majority of the time, and it's saving me a lot of time. And I have practices. I was visiting with one on Friday of last week, and the owner was just like, I was against it. And he now, he's kind of addicted to it. But to further frame kind of your question is, I think I wonder about the long term of over-reliance of AI. That's where I do worry a little bit, especially, and I'm not a veterinarian, but especially the reliance of it. When it comes to, some of these tools will write differential diagnosis for you. They'll interpret your lab work. And so when we're looking at things like that, what I'm going to question is who's feeding that? And that's where I would rather wait for an Antech or an IDEX or a massive company that is feeding it millions of cases and training it than someone who's using some iteration of ChatGPT for medical-based decisions. Like, that's terrifying.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. The idea that we're feeding ChatGPT and to talk specifics of medicine is terrifying. But that's I talked to Dr. Jules Benson at Nationwide, and he's just a massive data nerd. I love Jules, but he talks and says, your AI is only as good as the data that you train it on. And so I think you're absolutely right. It's going to take a big data set. Nationwide is doing some really cool stuff. Their Pet Health Zone, I think, is really a fun tool. It's not AI, but it is a neat way of leveraging the huge amount of data that they have collected over the years about illness and what breeds are likely to have different presentations and different illnesses and things like that at different stages of their life. If you haven't seen it, it's cool. But it's got to be a player about that size who can say, we're going to start feeding this data. I look at like Banfield, for example, DCA, so some big corporation like that's got, they're seeing tens of thousands of patients a day. I'm like, boy, the potential they have to be able to generate something. But again, this would be a huge undertaking. But I'm with you. I think that level of change is coming. But even then, it's still going to be about the data that we put into the system. You know what I mean? So if you have a pet and you're looking at the pet and you feed the blood work into the machine and it comes back and says, well, based on this blood work, this is what you need to do. I still would be very hesitant to go forward without integrating that information into what I'm seeing with my eyes, what the pet owners are saying to me. Like, those things are still going to matter, and it's going to take someone on the ground to put those pieces together. And so anyway, I think it's going to be an interesting future. And yeah, I'm excited about it, but I am also definitely wary of pedal down. The other thing I've seen a lot in the industry is the use of the term AI in ways that I think is probably inappropriate.
It's a marketing term now, yeah.
100% it's a marketing term now. It's artificial intelligence. It's like, it seems like a very basic algorithm.
Algorithm, AI, completely different thing, yeah.
Yeah, but I have 100% seen very basic algorithms of, if they select this, then you do that. And it's like, that's not AI. That is just following a basic pathway. But I see a lot of people, it's just because anything that has AI tagged to it gets a lot of attention and it gets investor dollars and stuff.
For sure.
It is a little bit of buyer beware right now about what are you really getting and what are the capacities here.
And this is why, I always tell practices, go on Google, type in veterinary artificial intelligence, and then I schedule a demo with at least 3 to 5 of them. And I always tell practices, 10 minutes is as long as this demo should be. If someone can't convince you of their value in 10 minutes, then move on. Because what happens, Andy, is they'll get you on the phone for an hour and you're like, it sounds like they do everything. I don't, and you're just going to sign up. And 10 minutes, do 3 to 5 demos. So block an hour off your time. Ask them how long they've been around for, ask your colleagues and then ultimately, determine what's right for your practice.
What do I want in this demo, right? Because I show up and I'm like, all right, I want a 10-minute demo. What are my objectives going into a demo like this?
Yeah, so it's going to be different for every practice. This is kind of going back to looking at the overall opportunity for improving efficiency in the practice. So a lot of AI tools right now, very, very low cost AI tools that don't integrate within your management system. They're just recording the conversation and they're producing a SOAP note. And so if you just want to try it out, and you're looking for something super low cost to do that, then, see who does better, right? Yeah. Can you train the SOAP note to predict certain recommendations based off of, if a vomiting diarrhea dog comes in and it's writing your SOAP note and you're a veterinarian who loves to dispense metronidazole for it, can you train it to automatically write that as a part of the plan for you, where maybe another doctor has a different preference or they go to first, whatever it might be. So what are the levels of being able to train writing the medical note based off of the veterinarian that's seeing that appointment? So asking that, are you also looking to use it to produce a summary follow-up in layman's terms for the pet owner? Not all AI tools do that. So is that something that you want to do? Do you want to be able to provide something for the owner to be able to leave with, to summarize the visit and take home and have an explanation in a way that's easy for them to understand? Is integrating it in your management system a priority? Do you want it to literally open up your management system and start the medical note for you? Do you want it to be able to send health questionnaires ahead of the visit and then interpret what seems to be the cause before, they even show up to the appointment because they completed a health questionnaire? So looking at all those little nuances and trying to determine what problem are you trying to solve, and specifically in this area, how much do you want to go into it? Some practices want all in, some are like, hey, I just want the basic. And there's nothing wrong with either.
I like that. I did some work in the Netherlands a couple of years ago, and I went around to a number of different practices over there. I was sort of trying to get my head around how they work and how they function. And, in the Netherlands, it's really expensive to hire people. Like, you have to pay huge employment taxes. It is very, again, that's sort of the cost of a robust social safety net, which they have, and that's how they roll. And so there's that. So the upside is big, nice safety net. Employees get nice, support packages, things like that. Downside is it costs a ton to hire somebody. And so the vet practices over there have responded by being very small. The majority of the practice I went into had literally 3 employees. It would be a doctor and 2 technicians or 1 technician and 1 assistant. And they answered the phones and they checked people out. And that was it. There wasn't a front desk. It was those 3 in the building doing that. And it was just interesting. I've always sort of looked at that and sort of been like, this is where the model goes as we sort of pay people more. And if you want to raise salaries and things, this is one way that goes down. And again, it was just the practices were smaller and they did a lot more with a lot fewer people. Eric, when you look into your crystal ball and dial it in for 10 years from now, do you think practices are smaller than they are today because we have gotten more efficient and we are paying the people we have more? Do you think that they're about the same size as far as number of employees that we have? Or do you think that they have grown and we have larger practices, possibly leveraging, maybe fewer practices overall, the big guys kind of get bigger? What do you see 10 years from now, just as you kind of try to see the future?
Yeah, so I would definitely think they're smaller, but they're efficient, not just in the fact that they're smaller. I think there will be more widespread utilization of a lot of the things that we're talking about today, and that we still don't even know are coming down the line when it comes to just automating a lot of the tasks in the day-to-day running a hospital. And so I think they're smaller. I think they're more efficient. And I think that, they're going to thrive and they'll be great. We're seeing this kind of, at least in the practices that we're seeing this resurgence of, independent ownership. And when you ask them, hey, what are your long-term goals here? What are you trying to do in the next 3 to 5 years and longer than that? And I would argue to say, and this is not statistically relevant by any means, but I would argue that probably 100% of them also they want to stay small. And I think a lot of people that are starting practices are people who sold, recently or have always had this dream of owning, but they realize that sometimes bigger isn't always better. And so I do think that there will be this kind of, massive volume of these just smaller practices and practicing the medicine that they want to practice in terms of, are they going to do surgery? Are they going to do dental? I think we're seeing a lot of practices that are like, we're just going to see wellness visits, or we'll just do, basic diagnostics and refer everything else out. That's what I would guess. It'll be interesting for us to have this conversation in 10 years. Like, I know we'll have and see, where's your head at? Are you thinking also small based off of your experience?
I do actually. Yeah, I do. I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about recently is this. And so, you and I were there together. I think we may have even been in the same room. I remember in about 2010, 2011, the drum beats were really loud that we had a production problem of veterinarians in terms of overproduction. We had these new vet schools that were opening up and class sizes were expanding. And the drum beats were really loud. And it was just common. It was common sense, wisdom, knowledge that we were making too many veterinarians and veterinarian salaries were going to plummet. And that was it. And I can't emphasize enough that it was so widespread. It was talked about constantly. And then I was in a room one time and Danny McVitie was in there from Lap of Love Pet Hospice. And I think it was I can't remember if it was a panel or if it was a lecture that I was doing and Danny was in the audience, but someone was talking about this overproduction of veterinarians and things like that. And Danny raised her hand and she said, I'm the CEO, founder of Lap of Love Pet Hospice. And, I keep hearing about all of these veterinarians that were overproducing. Can you tell me where they are? Because I desperately want to hire them and I can't find them anywhere. And then heads started nodding in the room of, I also cannot hire a veterinarian. And just like that, Eric, the whole industry, in my mind, it just swung the other way. And suddenly we were freaking, there was never a happy medium. It was never like, turns out we might not have an overproduction problem. Let's just be happy for a while. It was nope. It was one extreme, the world is ending, and to the other extreme, the world's ending. And so then, ever since then, we've been in we don't have enough veterinarians problem. And so now you got the stuff in the AAVMC, who has a vested interest in making more vet schools and turning out more people. They're saying we're having a shortage, but the AVMA is really pushing back and saying, we don't agree with this assessment. And I think it's easy to kind of dismiss the AVMA sometimes because they can be kind of crotchety in their way, and they can be a little contrary. But I can't write them off in this one and say, those guys are wrong. I don't know that they're wrong. And so anyway, I'm looking at this and I'm looking at this question and go, do we have an undersupply of veterinarians in the next 30 years? Is it going to be this classic thing where we don't have enough people? I don't know that I'm sold on it. I think when I look into my crystal ball, I think 10 years from now, I suspect we've probably got about the same size practices, but this is sort of pulling in something from human medicine. I think that we right now are starting to see administrative bloat in vet medicine that we saw like 15, 20 years ago in human medicine, where all of a sudden there's a lot more middle managers, there's a lot of, area managers, things like that. And so some of the practices are getting bigger, but they are having more sort of administrative people as opposed to people on the ground seeing the patients. Does that make any sense?
It does. And it's interesting because you're right. Even thinking in the last 5 years, just the volume of roles that are being created that weren't typical in the average veterinary practice. Even seeing, back when you and I probably started knowing each other, everyone needs a practice manager. And then now it's everyone needs an assistant manager and IT and marketing and all of this. And I agree with you. I think that it's becoming very top heavy and there might be, some people that are going to step back and look at that. I think the interesting thing, Andy, and I think it's worth mentioning, is that I think regardless of the conversations that we're having in the profession about, in this case, shortage of veterinarians or whatever it might be, I think sometimes what happens is as practices, we kind of look at that and we're like, well, this is the reason I can't do X. And the reality is that yes, there are always going to be problems that the profession's trying to predict to get ahead of the future. But what you should really be focusing on is doing whatever's going on in your practice really well and not using these exterior things as excuses. Because I hear this all the time. Practices are, we can't hire. Well, but no one can hire because there is a shortage of veterinarians and it is what it is.
Yes.
And I would challenge you to step back and say, well, no one can hire and we haven't hired anyone. Maybe there's a different approach that we can take to do better. Yes. Because it becomes very problematic where you go somewhere and you're like, you can't hire a veterinarian. And like, actually there are people hiring veterinarians and they're not all corporate and they're not all paying these high bonuses. There are people who are selling themselves a lot better. And who are selling the culture of that practice a lot better beyond buzzwords and who are actively working at it. And so that's where I challenge, practices to just kind of say, all right, there are things that are working against us, but we could probably do better because the chances are is you probably can't.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's a real danger right now that this has become a mantra when you say, wow, we're really stressed. Well, that's just because you can't hire anybody. And you go, well, that would be one possible approach, but it's always dangerous if that ends the conversation. You know what I mean? It's almost like, well, there's this thing that's outside of your control. And so you just stop your search because this is what the earth has given to you and there's no way around it. And that's not really true. Eric Garcia, where can people find you online?
Anywhere, ericgarciafl.com or anywhere at ericgarciafl on social.
Cool. Thanks very much for being here. Guys, thanks for tuning in today. Everybody take care of yourselves. And that's what I got for you guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Eric Garcia for being here. If you ever get a chance to see Eric Garcia's lecture, you should definitely do it. He's a great speaker. If you ever get a chance just to talk to him, he is just a genuinely wonderful person. He is up there on my list of favorite people that I know in the profession. And it's just, what a wonderful list it is. We have so many great people in this industry, in this profession, but Eric Garcia is right there at the top. So anyway, gang, thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves, everybody. I'll talk to you later on.